For any of you that was fortunate enough to be at Clover Park on Tuesday night or who watched the game on SNY, you saw something beautiful. And that is Jacob DeGrom looking like Jacob DeGrom. And with a healthy Jacob DeGrom, in my opinion, there's not much standing in the Mets' way from being a dominant team this season. And that's what we're going to talk about on today's edition of Locked On Mets, what DeGrom's health means for this team and what we can look forward to with him and Max Scherzer atop this Mets rotation.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. So I already spent an entire podcast that you can find where I set expectations for Jacob DeGrom and Max Scherzer this season. I went through the numbers last year, the projections for them, what I think they're going to do, and really did break down what we could, hopefully see from the Mets' two aces this season. But that was before I got to see DeGrom pitch. And it's not like it changed anything, but it confirmed everything I was thinking. Because as I said on that podcast, there has suddenly been this notion from fans, from outsiders, from pundits who feel like Jacob DeGrom is now suddenly, one of the biggest injury risks in the game. And I understand that coming off the season he just had. But as I mentioned then in previous podcasts, and as I will reiterate now, Jacob DeGrom has not been an injury-plagued pitcher in his career. In fact, he's been one of the most durable starters in baseball. You look at his 8 seasons, you had last year, the 1 year where he dealt with a significant amount of injuries and missed a significant amount of time. And then you had 2016, where he had that surgery to repair an ulnar nerve in his arm at the end of the season. Did make 24 starts that year, threw over 140 innings, but ended up missing the end of that season. And that was, of course, the year where the Mets went on that magical run to a wild card spot with Noah Syndergaard and Bartolo Colon being the only real starting pitchers in that rotation, with Seth Lugo and Robert Gsellman and Gabriel Ynoa and so many different guys that factored in. So Jacob DeGrom, though, has always been healthy throughout his career. And I understand why, coming off that season, there was the concerns. But I think DeGrom put a lot of them to rest with this start on Tuesday. He goes out, he's averaging 97.7 miles per hour on his fastball, topped that at 98.7. So the velocity was there. And I think there has been sometimes in the past where DeGrom will go into a spring start and the velocity might not quite be there. And then you're a little bit concerned. And there's other times where he goes out and he's pumping 101. And it's like, all right, well, this guy's almost throwing too hard in spring. In a weird way, 98 for DeGrom was the perfect balance where no one could say he's throwing too hard in spring. And also no one can say that the velocity is a concern. So I thought that was a really promising side. The slider averaged at 92 miles per hour. He even tossed in a curveball just for fun because Max Scherzer wondered if he could throw one for a first pitch strike. So DeGrom, of course, drops one in there, smiles at the dugout. And also just the attention this guy commands. You see both dugouts. Everyone is, on a spring game or in a spring game, first row, just standing up, just watching. I mean, this guy commands your attention when he's on the mound. I'm hoping he's going to be on the mound this Sunday. Got a tradition with my dad and I. We always go out and catch a Port St. Lucie game, so I'll be there as a fan with him, and hopefully DeGrom will be on the hill, maybe giving the Mets a little bit more than the 2 innings we saw here in his first spring start. But he throws over 30 pitches, gets his feet wet. He threw 7 sliders, got 6 swings and misses, and a foul tip. So no one could touch the slider, as always. People have to remember this season he's coming off of, and if DeGrom's DeGrom, there's no doubt that he's going to be the best pitcher in baseball because he's a machine. I mean, he is just this perfect blend of mechanics and intelligence, and he is just able to go out and execute his game plan, it doesn't really matter who's standing in the box. If DeGrom's executing his game plan, he's nearly impossible to hit. Remember, he had a 0.50 ERA through 12 starts last year, and he made 3 more starts. The ERA ended up at 1.08 because he gave up a couple of runs in each of those starts. But I mean, the net result was just a remarkable statistical season. It's always fun to dive into those numbers. I'm not going to do it again because I've done enough. I mean, the guy was simply as good as it gets. It's basically like having a Josh Hader or the most elite closer in baseball, but for 7 innings. That's what Jacob DeGrom is. And so now we get to this point where Max Scherzer thrown into the mix, and Max Scherzer can be the workhorse. DeGrom doesn't even have to be the workhorse. Max Scherzer, in his first spring start, threw 72 pitches and went 5 innings. It's unheard of. Even in this type of a spring where it's rushed and we're not really sure exactly, or there's no real blueprint for how you jam a spring training where there's only 15 games. It's definitely going to be tough to get these guys ready. But Max Scherzer seems like if the season starts tomorrow, he's stretched out and ready to go. DeGrom's getting there. Who knows if he'll be fully stretched by the start of the season, but he will be at least a few starts in. And with the two of them, this is where this team is being underrated, in my opinion, because people are not putting enough stock into what it means to have Jacob DeGrom and Max Scherzer in that same rotation, other than just throwing out there how incredible they could be if he's healthy. But man, if you really think about it, and I did the math and threw this out there on Twitter too, teams are going to throw about 1,500 innings in a season. So if you look at that, and then you think about the fact that when DeGrom, was on the mound for full seasons prior to 2020, it was 3 years of 200 plus innings. Max Scherzer is always 200 plus innings. It is not unreasonable to expect both of them to give the Mets at least 200 innings this year. It's not. And yeah, maybe you'll say DeGrom at 150, whatever. Regardless of that, if you combine the two of them and you're counting on 400 innings out of Scherzer and DeGrom this season out of 1,500, you're talking about over a quarter of the Mets' innings thrown this year will be thrown by two of the best pitchers the game has ever seen. You add in a Chris Bassett, you add in, hopefully some bounce back years from Carlos Carrasco and a more complete season from a Taijuan Walker, not to mention some of the arms in the Mets bullpen like an Edwin Diaz that can be completely lights out as well. There's really top end pitching on this team. And so what we're going to talk about in the next segment here is the fact that there is a general pessimism that exists around this franchise, and rightfully so. But I see a Braves fan, tweet out stuff about, hey, the Mets are going to Mets, or whatever it is along those lines. That's always a phrase. The Mets are going to Mets. The Mets becomes a verb. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. It's lazy. And that's what I want to address in a minute, how lazy that is. And how if we actually use logic and reason as opposed to just, basing things on past cliches, this is a team that needs to be taken very seriously this season. Before we get to that, though, I want to tell you about the best tasting protein bar ever, which, of course, is Built Bar. One of my favorite parts of my daily routine is when I get to wake up in the morning and start the day off with a nice Built Bar and also some athletic greens, which I'll tell you about a little bit later. But Built Bars are so delicious. They come low in calories, low in sugar, high in protein, high in fiber. They all come covered in 100% real chocolate. So it is able to, cure that sweet tooth you might have that has you reaching into the cabinet for some ice cream in the freezer, some candy bars. Built Bars will help you kick that. They also have the Built Bar Puffs, which are the first ever protein-infused marshmallows. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat that also comes covered in 100% real chocolate with delicious flavors like the yummy cinnamon churro, the banana cream pie, the coconut marshmallow. If you want to try Built Bar today, go to built.com. Make sure you use the promo code LOCK15. You'll get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. Now, I do want to note for any of you watching on YouTube that there is a comment section, and I need to do better about responding to the comments, but I see a lot of the comments, and I want to note a comment here from a Martin Smith. I'm not knocking you, Martin. I've seen you comment before. I appreciate you watching the videos. Thank you so much for that. But this just leads into what I was talking about going into this segment. So Martin says, yeah, okay. See you at the All-Star break when DeGrom and Scherzer are on the DL and everyone's talking about how this team is underperforming. The irrational enthusiasm never ends when you're a Mets fan. Can we for once stop setting ourselves up for disappointment? what I would say to that is, as much as there is irrational enthusiasm, as you note here, there's also irrational pessimism. And there's nothing rational about looking at this roster right now and just expecting the worst, because the Mets have done everything they can this offseason to set themselves up to win. Now, will it happen? We don't know. And yes, we just saw a season where the Mets seem set up pretty good for success going into the year, and they faltered. But I look at a team now that doesn't have a basically rookie manager in Luis Rojas, which I mean, obviously managed the shortened season, but he was a young manager that was still learning on the job. You had a change in hitting coach in the middle of the season. You had a GM that was only in the job because the other GM had problems with a past, sexual assault case or sexual harassment case. And so suddenly this guy that was, I guess, technically the runner up, but really was supposed to be the assistant GM is running the team. Just a lot of novice experience running the Mets. Now you replace that with the experience of a Billy Epler and a Buck Showalter atop the organization. You add in veteran players that have won before. You complement a roster that already had some star players, and you have a rotation that has two of the best pitchers that have ever been paired together. And really, let's just say, the Mets do extend Jacob DeGrom after this season, which we all expect. I mean, there's a chance that these two guys could go down as the greatest duo in MLB history. That's how good they can be. And so again, we get back to, the irrational enthusiasm compared to what I call the irrational pessimism. I do not understand how we can have a logical argument where the winning deciding uh, um argument for lack of a better description there, where what wins the argument is just saying the Mets are going to Mets. I can't stand that. And I'm hoping that we get to a point now with Steve Cohen in place where this team is going to become too big to fail. The Dodgers are too big to fail. And to get there, it's going to take a lot of time. They have a superstar front office that has just made that thing an absolute undeniable machine. Their farm system hums every year. They just churn out prospects that can be used on their roster to accent things when injuries happen, or to go out into the trade market and get pieces without really hurting the farm system in the future of the team. It's just an unbelievable thing that they've built over there. And that's a standard that's going to be very hard to match. At the same time, you got a roster now, or you got a owner now that's going to always make sure this team is competitive. And at a certain point, I would imagine that we're going to have to stop leaning on those old tropes of the Mets are going to Mets, LOL Mets, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. This team's not going to do anything because it's the Mets. It's not a real logical argument. There's no factual basis behind this idea that just because they wear blue and orange and they play at Citi Field in Queens, that they're going to be terrible. And I just will not continue to lead credence into that. And you know what? If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And if I have to eat crow, and once again, it's a September like it was last year, where I'm just counting down the days to the end of the season, and the Mets blew it again, and I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. And I have egg on my face. I have egg on my face. But I feel like I'm sitting in the position right now where I am, arguing for the Mets, and I'm kind of putting my flag down that this is the team that should win the National League East. And granted, the Braves are great, but I feel like these are two teams that can go at it all season, and both of them should be in the playoffs. For me to feel at times like I'm alone in that opinion, just because there is so much irrational pessimism surrounding this franchise, I hope that we can look back on this and laugh and see that this machine that has been built, this team that has been built, this $300 million payroll can go out and can succeed and can thrive. And when you watch Jacob DeGrom go out in a spring start and look as unhittable as he did throughout the entire season last year when he was healthy in that first half, I think it shows you that this is a team that really needs to be looked at a little bit differently than they have been in years past. It's up to them to prove it, but I really think they will. Anyway, though, in the final segment today, I want to go through some of the arbitration numbers the Mets were able to agree with most of their players, but there still is 4 players that will be going into arbitration hearings. I'll talk about how that could affect the Mets this season, or if it does at all. But before we do, our next partner has a product that I literally use every day now, and that is Athletic Greens. For a while, I've been looking for something to give me the nutrients and the vitamins I need in my diet. I never have been a big pill guy, so I didn't really know where to go or what to look for. And then I get this shipment from Athletic Greens, and it has really just changed the way I feel. I have more energy now. I feel like I'm able to attack my workouts more. I'm running a little faster when I go on my jogs. And so to me, this has just been something that's kind of life changing to have this product. And it is something where with one delicious scoop of Athletic Greens, you're going to be absorbing 75 high quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, your recovery, your focus, and aging. There's been over 7,000 five-star reviews on Athletic Greens, and it's recommended by pro athletes. It costs less than $3 a day. So that makes it cheaper than your cold brew habit. It's the single best thing that you can do for your body in under 60 seconds. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. Just one scoop and a cup of cold water every day. That's how I start my day in the morning. Just grab that scoop of Athletic Greens, chug that down. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/MLB network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/MLB network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. All right, so I wanted to close the show talking about the arbitration deals that were agreed on today. This was an important deadline, more important than usual, because if a deal is not agreed upon, now they will be going to hearings as usual. But in the past, those hearings would take place in the off season. Because of the lockout, those hearings would now take place in season. So you have a pitcher like Chris Bassett, who's new to the Mets, trying to get his feet wet in New York, and he's going to have to go into a hearing where they're going to explain why he's not worth whatever he's asking for in his final year of arbitration. So that's not a great look. Regardless, though, that's only one player. And for the most part, the Mets were able to get deals done with a lot of these guys. We'll start with Edwin Diaz, gets $10.2 million. Edwin Diaz. It's crazy to me that this continues to just reiterate how self-serving that trade was for Jeff Wilpon. I've talked about it in the past. No one remembers that the Mets saved money in 2019 by making that trade because they sent out Anthony Swarzak and Jay Bruce. They got money back from the Mariners in that deal. They did acquire Cano's salary, but when you're going to sell the team, who cares? And Edwin Diaz was cheap then when he was not an arbitration player just yet, where he was still making, $500K or whatever the minimum was in 2019. Now he's expensive at $10.2 million. Cohen can afford it. It's fine. But it is just interesting that this payroll, which is going to be right at, 290 million, right up against that Steve Cohen threshold, that 30 point was, so I'm trying to think here. Cano's 20.325, I believe, from the Mets, and the rest he gets from the Mariners. So over $30.5 million come from that trade on the books this year. That's nuts. Moving on, though, Pete Alonso gets $7.4 million. This is another reason why I've talked at length at times why the Mets need to consider extending Pete Alonso. You see the deal that Matt Olson just signed with the Atlanta Braves. This is why you get him signed to a contract while you still have the leverage of the arbitration deals, because if he's already making 7.4 in arbitration his first year, if he has a huge season, let's just say Pete Alonso does what you could say is unthinkable, but really is a possibility. Let's just say Pete Alonso hits 53 home runs again. There's more runners on base because his team's better, so he drives in 140, which sounds ridiculous, sounds like video game numbers, but it is a distinct possibility. It could happen. Let's just say he finishes top 5 or even top 3 or even wins an MVP this year. He has an unbelievable season. You know how much money he's going to cost next year in arbitration? Hell of a lot more than $7 million. And remember, Mookie Betts by the end of arbitration was making close to $30 million. So this is why you extend a player like Pete, because the more he does, the more that ARB number will climb and the less incentive he has to sign an extension instead of just weighing it out and getting to free agency. So that is another interesting thing to talk about. Brandon Nimmo gets $7 million as well. Trevor Williams, $3.9 million. Of course, Williams came over last year in the Javi Baez trade. He is one of the least talked about pitchers that are going to factor in for the Mets this year, but I think Trevor Williams has a chance to contribute in a pretty significant way. I don't know if he'll necessarily make a ton of starts, but I wouldn't be surprised if he made 10 by the end of the season, just based on, maybe being an opener sometimes, but also just because, he is going to be that swing man type guy, I think, that's going to maybe take that last spot in the Mets bullpen. No options for Trevor Williams, and they just paid him $3.9 million. So I imagine he will make this team. Dominic Smith, $3.95 million. Seth Lugo, $2.925. JD Davis, $2.76. Joey Lucchesi, $1.15. Jeff McNeil, $3 million. Louis Guillorme, $875,000. That leaves us with Chris Bassett, Tomas Nido, Drew Smith, and Miguel Castro as the 4 players that will be going to arbitration hearings. It will be interesting to see once those hearings are under wraps what the final payroll will be at for this Mets team. I do think that it is something that maybe should be talked about a little bit. The Mets only signed Adam Ottavino and added Chris Bassett to their payroll at the other side of this lockout when that Steve Cohen tax went in. I don't think it means that Steve Cohen is cheap, but I do think, and hold on, that sentence just didn't even feel right coming out of my mouth. It almost was like I heard the echo, I heard it regurgitate in the room, and it almost like knocked me back in my chair. Obviously, he's not cheap, but I've seen some Mets fans complain that more wasn't done in free agency. So I just want to point that out, but also say that even though he might not have crossed that threshold this year, it doesn't mean he's ever gonna, or he'll never cross it. And it also doesn't mean that he should have crossed it, because why pay an 80% surcharge if you don't have to? If the move that you make isn't going to really change the fortunes of your ball club, if Kyle Schwarber to the Mets wasn't a reality unless they overpaid for it and ended up giving him more than what he got with the Phillies, where he's going to play probably a more significant role than he could have played with the Mets, and you were looking at Dom Smith in camp, who's now making, what was that again? 3.95, right? And you think Dom could be a facsimile of what Schwarber's going to be for the Phillies, which, again, you say that's crazy, but going into last season, you know who was projected to have the better year, Dominic Smith or Kyle Schwarber? It's Dominic Smith. He was coming off the better season, or even seasons. And then Schwarber, of course, put it all that together again. Remember, Schwarber was non-tendered last year by the Cubs, which was, in retrospect, a stupid decision. But bottom line, the Mets are going to have the richest payroll in baseball. And you never know. Mid-season, they may barge through that threshold. They may acquire a player that's making 25 a year, whoever that could be, to put them over the top. And suddenly they are the highest level of a tax-paying team. But for now, they're under that 290, and I think that's fine. I think it's a completely reasonable thing to not eclipse $290 million on your payroll. And I think they have enough, as I've been talking about the last couple weeks here. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I don't know everything we're going to talk about on tomorrow's show, but I will once again be joined by Rob Pearsall of Mets Legends for a special Throwback Thursday Mets Legends segment. Going to be something we continue to do where we remind you of some of the names from the past that you may have forgotten or never heard of. And I'll give you a teaser. There was a Met once named Vinegar Bend. Drink that in. Regardless, as always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB, hosted by Paul Francis Sullivan, but we call him Sully. Locked On MLB is where you want to go for all of your Major League Baseball coverage. You can follow Locked On MLB wherever you get podcasts.